How you guys doing tonight? I don't know how much of a crowd we'll have on these kind of news sections that we're going to be doing, but basically what the idea behind this is going to be, and everything we do in the community, I just want to, these are just like ideas I have. At the same time, doesn't mean that they're for sure going forward, and it doesn't mean we have to do it in the exact format every time. So as you guys are probably well aware at this point, like my whole goal with the community is just to provide value for you guys. So I know I'm just a little bit further ahead than most of you on the Salesforce journey. So, it's really just trying to take like what I've experienced, what I've done, and, put it in a way that's presentable to all of you so that you can use that information how you'd like. So I just try to usually just do things that I wish I would have had when I was starting out. And, so like what I'm saying, it doesn't mean that the way that we're going about these things always has to be the case. And I just want to share all that just because as we go through these next ones, I have a few planned, obviously. And if we don't love it, feel free to give me some feedback or put it wherever you'd like. So we're in the community and we can adjust it and tweak it so it's good for you guys. With that being said, tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of focus in on some of our soft skills. So we've been doing a lot of like our guest interview speaker type stuff, and I love them. They're great. I'm going to continue to do them. But I was feeling like every time that we get these people coming in, we get this really high level idea of like what's going on, and we don't really get into the weeds on things. And so depending on the guest that we speak with, they're going to probably bring some kind of perspective that I don't have. And that's awesome. And they tell us all about it. But it's really hard within that time frame to like get deep into the weeds and be like, okay, yeah, this is actually how I apply that info, right? It's more of kind of getting some ideas from them and then being like, yeah, do I like that? Do I not like that? Do I want to go that route like they did? So the point of these ones, I really want to kind of just like talk about it and how it's applied to me and how, I've failed in a lot of these cases, things we're going to talk about, and how I got better at it. So tonight, without further ado, we will go through interviews, and I've had a lot of feedback from people in the community taking interviews, striking out essentially, and, wondering if there's better ways they can try to prepare for those. And I put together a little presentation of what I felt like would really help us out with that. And we're just going to kind of work through it. So let me get this all set up and I'll share my screen. While I'm doing that, same thing as always, feel free to always use the chat. Let me know if you guys have questions. It's pretty nonchalant tonight. So, if you want to raise your hand, cool. If not, feel free to just jump off mute and you guys can chatter and ask questions that way too. Before we get started, is there anything specifically that you guys were wanting to get out of tonight's meeting that we want to focus on?
Personally, I didn't have anything specific in mind, but I kind of wanted to see what you do since this is the first one you're doing, and then yeah.
Okay, I love it. Okay, let's do that. Share here. All righty. So these are very simplified. Okay, these are not some big presentation I'm putting together. It's more just going to be like talking points for me and something for you to look at other than just watching my face try to explain all this stuff. Usually tends to help out as we do this type of stuff. So we're going to go through this presentation tonight. We're going to talk about 5 reasons why you're probably getting rejected. And those 3 things really starting off are a lot of technical skills. And then we kind of get into some stuff around like what you do to prep your space. And the last thing that everybody dreads typically is what kind of questions you're going to ask back in that interview. So using these 5 steps, we're going to kind of talk about the timeline of, really getting started all right, cool, you got an interview, but the question is usually, all right, now what do I do with that? So I'm going to go through these 5 steps with you, things that were difficult for me, things that I've tried to really improve, and share some fails along the way as we do that. So the very first thing that I feel is helpful for me is, I have some other notes over here I want to look at. So as we do this, I'll get an interview, and this still happens today. So if you guys are new here and you haven't been to any of these before, I worked as a full-time admin and senior admin for about 5 years before I finally made the switch to be a Salesforce consultant. So now, instead of one interview every once in a while, I do interviews all the time so that I can try to land more jobs. So I've had even more practice with this. It's a little different format because you're kind of talking almost like a partnership instead of, do we want to hire you as an employee? But it's essentially the same thing, because now every day, I just did one today, I have to go back and forth, and I've almost felt like it's improved this process for me too, because I have to get really good at figuring out what these guys do. And my strategy so far hasn't been to try to find a lot of companies, to find one company to work for. It's been to do the opposite. It's been to find a lot of companies that I can work for at a smaller rate. And the idea behind that for me is, if one thing goes wrong with one company, I still got others and runway there that I'm not feeling like, oh crap, there goes my entire business and money that I'm making. So I do this a lot, and just did one actually today. Just got introduced to somebody, and every single time what I've noticed is the more you know about their business before you get on that phone call, the easier it is for you. The more you know about that individual, the easier it is for you. The more you know about weird things that they wouldn't expect you to know, like their funding rounds and maybe a one-off connection who used to work there, or a review you saw somewhere about their product. The more you know that kind of stuff, even better, right? So when it comes to actually doing this part of it, one thing I've noticed when I've worked with some of you guys in the community with feedback after you've done your interviews, is this one tends to be probably everybody's crutch a little bit. Is it seems like you guys did everything else that is really kind of like the common sense stuff, right? Like, okay, I knew I took the interview, so I dressed well, and I made sure that I was presentable, and I knew that I had to shut my door, make sure there was no noise, like all that stuff you guys nail. And that's kind of common, right? At this point, you guys should know how to do all that stuff fairly well. This part is like where it catches people, I think, because of 2 things. I think it's one, you're not used to maybe going down that route depending on your background and the way you've had to interview in the past. I know some of my early jobs before that, it was pretty much just showing up in person, especially before remote. And it was like, what we are really good at here in our community is, as long as I show up presentable and I can somewhat talk, there's not too much I got to know, because they don't really have this high standard for me. And that was stuff like call centers or, these other jobs that I worked at before I got into a technical space. And I wasn't used to things like a technical interview. I wasn't used to knowing all this stuff about what a company does before getting the job. You're also, depending on where you're at, and I'm speaking in broader terms because obviously we got a group here tonight, so I don't know exactly where you were at before. But in broader terms too, if this is also going to be a step up in forms of salary and what you're getting paid, that can be another reason, right? Is they have a higher expectation of what you do. So some of these benefits of what you're going to get out of it, and what you want to do is you have tailored answers, you're more personable, you ask more relevant questions, and you're going to show higher interest, okay? So when we look at these 4 benefits here, the first one that we look at is these tailored answers. If I take the time on LinkedIn, and really how I would do this is, if I get a new opportunity to interview somewhere, very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to LinkedIn and I'm going to look up who that individual is. And I'm also going to look up the company. So I mainly use it for the person itself who's going to be interviewing me. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have the panel of who is going to interview you. And it's common to be like, all right, who's my boss? And let me go look him up. It's going to set you apart even more if you can look up everybody on that panel, right? Whether it's just the guy from marketing that has to sign off on it, or, it's just the recruiter that's getting you through the door. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter. Your idea every single time in any of those interactions is to treat them like you prepared specifically for that person. And that's what's going to help you stand out in their mind. It's going to set the right impression. And it allows you to not have the same conversations over and over. People pick up on that. So having interviewed for a lot of places, as well as being on the other side, it's really noticeable when we've interviewed somebody. I already get the rundown from the marketing guy, and he says, he basically talked about this, or she basically talked about this. And from that point forward, it's like, if they come in and tell me the same thing, then that already is kind of showing me that they didn't really prepare for the lesson. They didn't really prepare for what they wanted to talk about. And automatically, it kind of just feels like, all right, they saw this come up somehow, and now they're applying for it. And that's kind of their approach. There's nothing really that sets them apart. So the number one thing you really want to do in an interview is you're trying to turn this, and that leads into number two, is you want it to be a conversation. You don't really want this to stay as an interview. An interview means I ask a question, you answer the question. I ask another question, you answer another question, and so on and so forth. You don't want it to be that way. You want the interview to feel like it's an easy back and forth conversation. You also need to understand you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. And that kind of energy is also going to show a big difference in your demeanor as you understand that. If you go in thinking, whatever they ask me, I have to know, and they're in control of this entire thing, it's easy to read that on you. And it's easy to feel like they're just going to give me all the cookie cutter answers. They're going to say what I feel like they think I need to hear, versus the other way around, when it's something that you feel like you have options on the table. Whether you do or not is a different story. But if you feel that way, that makes us, as the people interviewing you, feel like, okay, well, this person's a little more sought after because they're asking us questions. They're interviewing us. They're seeing what our work-life balance is about. They're seeing, what our company's goals are, what we stand for as a company, what the team's all about, who they're going to be working with. It just kind of leads into these next few, right? Which is you can ask more relevant questions when you do that, and you're going to show higher interest. Just this stage alone, this alone sets you apart from the people that they're going to want to pick from. I know fairly quickly when I have had to interview people to get hired on a team who I'm going to advocate for. And it's usually someone that just nailed this one slide because they stand out to me. They feel like a friend, and they feel like somebody I want to work with. And at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. You want to work with somebody that you feel comfortable around. You don't want to work with somebody you feel like it's going to be awkward, or they don't understand, or it's difficult to get along with them. So you want it to feel like you're just interviewing a friend. And then all the technical skills kind of come secondary, because then they know this person's great at speaking and talking to everybody, and we get along great with them. If they're not the strongest on the technical side and they don't answer every single technical question we're about to ask, I'm going to have more leniency there, because it's harder to find somebody that has these soft skills nailed down versus it is to find somebody that can either learn the technical or is really great at it. We've also had the opposite at big companies where somebody comes in and they're highly technical, but they can't talk to us at all. And we skip on them because it's like, same idea. I have to figure out problems with you. I have to be able to approach you. I have to be able to coach you. I have to be able to turn a project over to you and have the confidence you can go and speak to other project leaders about what we're doing. All that is way more important to me than whether or not you know all this technical stuff about Salesforce that anybody can really take the time to learn on Google, Trailhead, YouTube, all those different resources. So nailing this slide, without a doubt, is the best thing that you can put all of your time into after you get that interview. This slide is going to be the best. Everything we talk about afterwards from this slide is secondary to this slide. So I just want to make that part clear, at least in my experience and what I've gone through. So I'll pause there real quick. Is there any questions on this slide before we move to the next one? Okay, cool. Go to the second one here. All right. Second one we want to talk about today is cramming your technical questions, okay? I have 3 resources I'll provide to you guys after the fact with where you can go and look at these different questions. But the point of this slide is if you're like me, in my experience, I struggle a lot to be able to remember every single in and out of Salesforce and what you're going to ask me. This may be a year ago, but I took an interview at one point, and at this point, right, I'm sitting as a senior Salesforce admin for at least 3 years. And for whatever reason, I don't remember why, but they kind of asked me some like softball type questions around a Salesforce admin and how you would do something. And because I was so caught up in this role, it's not that I didn't know how to do it, but typically what happens is you learn, and you start putting yourself higher up on this pedestal, okay? And all that foundational stuff kind of becomes like, okay, yeah, I understand, I remember the gist of it, but like I'm not too worried about all the details because I'm always wrapped up in this. A good example of that is, here's what happened to me. This is where I kind of failed, is I got into the interview, and the last like 2-3 years of my life as a senior Salesforce admin, I was working on flows and automation, and I knew that stuff kind of like the back of my hand because I was doing it every single day. Now, what I wasn't doing is, it wasn't part of my role at the current company I worked for, was adjusting things on the Lightning page layout. So essentially, when you go to a page in Salesforce, what you're looking at, you can adjust like where those fields go, you can adjust what displays there, all that stuff. And it's not that I didn't know how to do it, but they started giving me a scenario, and I was on a call where I had to show them how to do it on demand. And I was like, oh crap, I actually like can't remember like where to go to click on this. And I would have figured it out, right? It was just a matter of time or a quick Google. But it's stuff like that where it's like, they probably know that, I know that. It's a quick Google away to do that, but it sets the wrong impression because I'm coming in high saying like, oh yeah, I know how to do all this technical stuff. And then they give me a softball question in their mind and I'm like, fumble it, right? I'm just like, man, I don't remember how to adjust this stupid thing on the page layout, which I should know because I'm claiming that I'm clear up here, right? I was able to kind of laugh it off a little bit, and they were pretty cool about it. But it's stuff like that that I've also seen on the other end, where another good example is we had somebody one time come in and they claimed to be an expert on data loader. There's things like that that you kind of want to be careful about what you claim, because you're always like waiting for that one guy at the company that literally is an expert and he lives and dies whatever subject you said you were an expert at. And then that person's just like ready to like roast you on it. So I've seen a couple. There's the last company full-time that I worked for, there was a guy who's excellent at Excel. And I know we all lie and say we're proficient at Excel on our resume, but this guy literally is like an expert at Excel. So if we ever had anybody say they were good at Excel, then he's like just going clear to level 10 and is like, all right, tell me how to do this then. And then they're like, well, I don't even know what that is, right? And he's like, oh, well, why are you saying you're an expert? So one, I would be cautious about that. So it kind of sets the wrong impression that way and then can put you in an awkward position. The other example I was going to use was around data loader. We had somebody say kind of the same thing. And there was a girl on my team at the time, and she was the same way, excellent with data loader. That was pretty much her day-to-day activity. And so for her, it's like back of her hand. So she starts asking these really kind of technical questions of what to do. And the lady didn't know any of it, right? So it really made her look bad. Whereas if she would have said, yeah, like I'm familiar with it, I don't use it on the day-to-day, but I could easily figure it out. Well, Mahathi at the time, she would not have done that, right? She would not have tried to approach those questions. So it's not like she was purposely trying to grill her, but if she's saying she's an expert, she's going to go for those questions first versus something else. And all that to say 2 things, right? Which is be mindful of what you end up saying. But number 2 is you're going to forget some stuff, and it's okay. the best way that I've learned to do this is kind of kicking it back to like high school days, where it's like, got a test, doesn't matter if I've studied or I feel prepared for it. I'm cramming definitely before I go in and take that test, because there's going to be something I'll remember. Like it's a key word that I can remember, and then that sparks what I got to do. Or it's like a specific question that I know is coming and I don't remember ever the ins and outs of it. So I got to kind of rehearse how that actually works. That stuff has saved my bacon a ton of different times. Just making sure I cram before I end up going in. So again, with these three here, I have some really good insights, I feel like, of questions that I'll refer to if I go for one of those roles. So I'll share that with you guys. Again, I'll pause on this slide for a second. Is there any questions on that?
I'm curious what the resource you're gonna give to us is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, a lot of these are kind of just like a list of different questions in a row. So I think all three of these at least have 20, if not more. And the questions are like very tailored. So it'll say something specific like, tell us the difference between profile and permission sets and how you would use those specifically. So it will go through that and then break down that exact question and be like, these are the main differences. This is what you, and that's why it's helped me going in, because then it's like, maybe I'm not going to remember the exact wording I need to say going into that interview. Do I understand a permission set, what it does? Of course. Do I understand how you do permissions on a profile? Of course. But I might not remember it exactly the way that they're wanting me to give them that information. I
Like the
might
canned
stumble.
response.
Exactly, right? Like I'll kind of stumble through it and I don't want to set that impression. I want it to come off sharp, that I clearly understand how this works. And I always feel like that gives the best impression. So these resources here help you do that, and are the things that I cram on just to kind of refresh my memory on some of that stuff. Good question. Any others before we move to the next slide? I haven't really been checking the chat either, but okay, cool. Let's go to the next one. Next one is kind of a nice hack. And this one plays into what we talked a lot about with past guest interviews around your portfolio and how important that is, right? So we talked about that, I think just last week a little bit with Chris, and setting up your digital portfolio and why he felt it was important as a recruiter. Same idea on this kind of stuff is how you're going to use it. So you obviously have a portfolio, and the difference between these two, they can go hand in hand, but I think they're different. Is your portfolio is almost a collection of your work you want to display and put it online somewhere that people can view, usually a website of some sort. In that website and in that portfolio, you'll refer to things that you know how to do, whether that's in like a blog format, or you do a YouTube video, or you do a podcast, whatever you decide to do, you're trying to explain what you know. Versus this sandbox specifically has really helped when I've either had to do like a take-home assignment for an interview, or I've had to refer to specific things, or I've had to show like on my screen how something works. If I can, at any cost possible, get that edge where I know I'm going to have to do something like that, this is where this has really saved me. Because again, when we're thinking about the interview, right, you want to be as prepared as you can, and you're really just trying to set this impression that you know what you're doing. You know how to find things, you know your resources well. And so if they are going to ask me how to build a flow, I want to make sure I have a flow that's pretty current in there, and I can refer to that flow for the rest of the interview, exactly how it's built, why it's built that way, and the importance behind it. Very similar to this meeting tonight. If I didn't prepare anything, I could probably come up with something to say to you guys, right? But it would be difficult because I don't have specific examples in mind. I don't have like specific stories I want to tell, or exactly how I want to show you this information. So again, it would come off a little less clean, right? Whereas when we have this presentation, when I have specifics I want to share with you, when we're taking the time to pause and ask people for questions, comes off a little more prepared, that I was ready for this call tonight, right? It's the same thing when they want to ask you this kind of technical stuff and going through specific scenarios. You could get away with giving a hypothetical, but I've had more often than not people push back on me and tell me, okay, well, what's a specific though? Like maybe I talk hypothetical about a flow I built or about some fields I created. Then they get crazy and they'll be like, well, why did you create that field? And what did you do with the permission on it? And what was this in reference to? What kind of project were you building? And then pretty soon you're like so far down this hole where one or two things happen. One, you lied. And now you're like, crap, I can't keep up the lie because this is too many questions. And that, or two, it's like you were doing a hypothetical, but like now you don't know. And now you're in a different scenario because they're asking you something about permissions when in the first question was about how you created a field. And you're like, ah, crap. Now, because I didn't have something specific in mind, I'm now in this bad position where they're asking me other things that maybe I don't know and I didn't really want to direct attention to. So in these interviews, again, it's a conversation and you're trying to control that conversation to focus on topics and your strengths. You don't want to really focus on your weaknesses, right? Like, why would you? You're trying to sell yourself, trying to explain why you're the best fit. So doing so, you're focusing on your strengths. So the more you can control the conversation via being prepared and having specifics, the easier it is for them to understand what you're good at. And two, the chances decrease significantly that they're going to ask you for specifics because you're already supplying them. So that's how I've really helped myself on this stage is, you know, at least in my, and a lot of mine right now, they're around flows and automation or integration stuff. So in my sandbox, I have that, or now with clients, right? I record a lot of what I do and demos. So I, at least whatever it is, I have something on hand in a very specific scenario of a lesson I could tell them of why I did the things I did. Like, oh yeah, I had this client, this is what they did, and this is why we built this thing, and this is how I built it. And these are the problems that came up along the way. This is how we got over those problems. And this is what we ended up doing so that we could bypass that specific scenario. And this is why I wouldn't do that again. And this is why I would do this again. So you want to really walk them through that story versus leaving it in their hands to just ask you a bunch of questions right in a row that you may or may not know. So here's some specific ways you can do it, right? One, be specific, like we talked about. Two, if you are demoing something, you have it right there in your sandbox and it's proof that you built it, obviously, which is always the biggest seller. We talked about this with Chris last week, but same idea when you're selling a product. You are the product in the interview that you're selling. When you look at an Amazon item, like we mentioned last week, when you look at an Amazon item, you go to Amazon to purchase something, what do they have there? They have proof, they have a rating, they have exactly what the product is, they have exactly when that product can get shipped to you. You're trying to mimic that as much as possible when you are selling yourself, right? So like testimonies and proof that I've done this and how quickly I can start with you and how quick I can turn around items like this, right? You're trying to do something very similar when you sell it to them. So having proof is a big separator versus somebody just saying they can do it, right? Same idea when you look at it in the consumer mindset of when you go to Amazon, how likely are you to buy a product that does not have reviews? For me, it's like never. If it has like 10,000, I don't even look at anything else. I'm just like, all right, 10,000 other people bought this thing. It must be good, right? So same idea with this. And that allows you to talk about some of your past jobs and then demo those solutions. Before we move to the next, is there questions on this?
Well, I was thinking, so a lot of us are entry level in Salesforce, right? So for the third point of talk about past jobs, what would you recommend we put there instead?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's spend some time on that. I think with your past jobs, you have a couple options. One option is you could do your homework on transferable skills. So I know we have a few people in our community that are like teachers. If we use that example, it's kind of an easy one for me to break down is if I'm a teacher, well, 90% of what I'm going to do as a Salesforce admin is going to be what I did as a teacher, as far as soft skills are concerned. I have to prepare my work. I have to show those to stakeholders. So I have to report on how well I'm doing and track progress. I get followed up on by people. So my principal, my superiors at my teaching job are going to come check in on me. I have report cards go out. I have parent-teacher conference. There's things I have to deliver to these people to make sure that they know I'm teaching their children correctly. Well, that same idea, just that part alone, is the same thing you're going to do in Salesforce. You have to report to somebody like a VP, somebody like an executive on what you've done. What is the work that you've performed? How well is that doing? What is your report card for that? How do we measure that? How well are you at speaking with other people, right? So it's taking those transferable skills you have and just thinking of them in a different way. So it's, what am I good at now in my current job, and how would that apply? So if I personally did not have a job, that's what I tried to do with my call center job when I moved into Salesforce was, well, yeah, no, I'm really good at handling problems because that's what I do every single day. So how do I de-escalate problems? How do I work through intense scenarios in a lot of cases? Because the person on the other line is usually irate that we broke something or something didn't arrive on time or whatever. So it's like, how do I take that situation and de-escalate it? How do I still get them to give us a good review? How do I make sure that the problem doesn't happen again? How do I make sure that my superiors know it is a problem? Okay, well, transfer all that into Salesforce speak. I'm really good at documenting things, and that would be a really big goal I'd have going into all these tickets that we do, so that we know exactly what I built, why I built it, and who signed off on it. I'm really good at making sure all of our stakeholders stay happy with what we're doing and staying within budget and staying within the things that we've decided as a company we want to do in the next quarter. So I would probably go that route if you don't have one. If you've had one before, a little more obvious, like we talked about, just trying to think of like past scenarios that you've worked through that would be Salesforce related. Does that help answer your question, Vera?
Great answer.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions on this slide? Okay, let's go to the next one. This one's going to be kind of a layup, and then we'll move into, for the last few minutes we have, for like specific questions I wrote down that you can ask that will really make you stand out. For this one, this goes a lot further than you think. If you nail the first few things we've talked about, it matters less. But if you're kind of like a medium going into something, which this is a different subject, but in my opinion, I've always tried to apply for jobs that I'm maybe not quite qualified for. I always try to kind of push myself outside that boundary a little bit. So when I go in, I already know I got a lot to prove, and there's probably going to be stuff that I don't know. I do that. I've done that mainly to increase the amount of money I've been able to make, how quickly I can learn, and how quickly I can move up in my career, right? So the more uncomfortable you are and more you put yourself in that kind of situation, the better. So if you do go that route, then this means even more so, right? Because if I'm going to probably miss on some of those questions they ask me, I'm probably going to have to admit that I don't quite know that thing that they're asking me. And so I'm really trying to nail being personable and getting to know them and like why I would be a good fit and that I would catch on quickly. But if I don't do all those things, and then on top of it, they can't hear me, my audio sounds like messed up, they can't see me on the screen, it's glitching out, like, I don't know what it is, but we're all, especially in this remote world, like we're all just so turned off by that. And I've seen that even when I'm working with clients, right? Like I have clients right now, and we've had like a really bad winter this year in Utah, tons of snow. And I'm like out in this like city right now. It's like getting built out, but it's kind of out in the boonies. So my internet sometimes isn't great. And it's just so funny how quickly like even current clients I have are like to just be like, want to end the call, or they're like, just have me email them, or like not continue further with the conversation because they can't hear me well. And it just gets to be like one of those things where it's a little bit annoying. And then whether we want to or not, this also happens where we have biases that come to mind. We're all from different cultures and backgrounds and experiences and how we were raised. And, you know, there is obviously a part that we all want to try to control that as much as we can, and we should, and look into that. But whether we want to or not, we do have biases, and we do have unintentional thoughts that will come into mind depending on how people present themselves, right? It's just how the world works. And so you also want to put yourself in a position to be winning that way, right? So if they're missing questions, they don't really know what they're talking about. Maybe I caught them in something where they said they were an expert and they're not. And then it's like they got this like jacked up audio and they're not dressed well. I'm just like, who is this guy, that we're interviewing? Like, clearly I'm not hiring this person. Versus this thing can kind of be a savior as well, where it's like maybe they do miss on some of those things, but they're well dressed. They have a really like well-groomed kind of presentation towards us, whether that's their lighting or their audio or the room they're in is nice and organized. All those little things you really don't think make a big difference, they do, right? When you guys get on calls with me, you guys do the same thing, whether you think it or not. Like how I'm dressed for the day sets a tone for you and like who you think I am as a person, right? What I'm wearing today versus if I wore a suit today would depend on like what you thought about me. Whether or not you want to think that, that's what happens. And so you're just trying to put your best foot forward. And so it's good to remember some of these like little things of a tidy room means organized, well-dressed is trustworthy, good lighting is professional, right? That kind of stuff that you want to really focus in on. Yeah, and like I would really say I have a ring light right now that I'm using. This has really been super nice. Headphones are also really nice if you can get them. I'm just literally using like my old iPhone ones that still have like that jack cord that I can plug in. But yeah, a nice microphone's always great, and a ring light does a lot as far as like wonders go for these types of things. Just sets things up nicely. Other last tip is like if you are in a room with natural lighting, try not to make sure that your window, like that you're facing the camera and then the window's in the background, because all that sunlight coming in just like bleaches out the video, makes it kind of hard to see you and all that. So just kind of getting things set up for the best you can. Ring lights on Amazon are like 10, 20 bucks. So really highly recommend just investing in them, even if it's just one interview a year. Super nice to have for that kind of stuff. Any questions on this before we move to the very last slide for the night?
This is a quick question. It's not that complicated. What are your thoughts on people using like blurs or artificial backgrounds, like how you or me are using it right now? Like, how do people generally see that? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Or even just you.
Yeah. I would say I don't really have too much of like a preference on them either way. I think for me, like right now, if I ever have like my room in here is pretty blank, is typically why I have mine on. I could face it another way, but the way my computer setup is, it's all facing like towards my window, and I have a bunch of pictures on the wall on the other wall. So I guess if I reverse it, I'd probably have mine off. I also don't have doors to this area of where I'm sitting. So it's like right as you walk in my front door of my house, then there's like this little office room. So I constantly, like my wife or like my dog or whatever, like runs by. So the way everything's set up for me, I'm just like, it's probably better in my situation to have this on just in case something like that happens. I don't want it to be distracting. And that's really the preference I use for it. I don't think that it's like a good or bad thing though. Like if you just want to have it on or you want an artificial background, I think it's fine either way. I've never really had any pushback or comments made about that kind of stuff. Cool. Really good question though. Because I know like when we had our event with Jody, she asked me the same question before we got on. She was like, should I have like the blurred background? Yes or no? Like, I don't know. She's like, I feel like sometimes for me, it's kind of distracting. So I'm going to turn it off. So I'm like, okay, I guess I've never really had thought about it, to be honest, before she asked me that question too. I was like, I've never really thought about it. Just, I feel like whatever you want to do is fine. Okay, very last one for the night with the last like 5, 6, 7 minutes we have here. This is the very last piece, last ditch effort you got at this interview. You made it through, congratulations. The very last thing you want to do is nail the impression they're going to have when they leave that interview, okay? So 2 things have happened on this. I've had some really awesome ones and I've had some really bad ones. So we'll start with the bad. I remember one time I got to the end. I had nailed all the other interviews, in my opinion. And I thought things were going well with the guy I was interviewing with. I got to this last thing. He asked me if I had any questions. I didn't really prepare for it too much. So I asked a question around something to do with like their finances. It was something along the lines of like, kind of like how fast they were wanting to go public as a company. And my idea of asking that question was like, oh, I'm going to stand out because who asked that question, 1. And then 2, that's going to help me as a person understand like kind of the environment the company is working in. Because if they want to go public fast, that means it's going to be like you wear a lot of hats, you got to make decisions quickly, and there's not a lot of red tape. So I kind of asked that, and from other experiences I've had, it can really mess with how you want to structure your salary and your payouts when you get in the company. I worked with a company that did go public fairly quickly and sold for billions of dollars. And I had the opportunity to take more stock up front. And this was like the first job I had learned all this. I didn't. And then when they went public, there was like millionaires quite literally made. And I was like, man, I had the option to take way more stock than salary, and I didn't do it. So those were kind of the reasons why I was asking. So I felt like it wasn't too big of a deal. This guy took it like very differently. I don't know why, because he never talked to me again and just got rejected from this interview, but it like quite noticeably changed the vibe and changed like the way the person was talking to me. I felt like things were pretty casual. I asked this, it seemed kind of upsetting to this individual. And then they just like really kind of went on a rant for a minute of like why it didn't matter and like why the question like doesn't really apply and all this stuff. I think they probably got the idea of like that I was trying to be like money grubbing. I think that's what I felt from it, which I could see their perspective of maybe asking that kind of question, but that wasn't my intention. But it kind of stunk because it was the very last question to ask, and it quickly changed like everything to where it was just like, all right, I definitely am not getting this job, right? Like this one's gone. And then on the reverse, now that I've tried, like from that learning experience, I've tried to be more mindful of it, and it's worked really well. Where I was in negotiation for a while with a current client of mine for consulting, and I think I asked one of these on here, right? Which was I asked two of them, like what prompted this role to open up, and then who would be a poor choice for this position. And I specifically remember asking number 4 here. And they both paused for a minute and like took a second to try to understand what I asked. And then they were like, that's a really good question. And I felt like that put the cadence forward to be like, okay, hey, like this guy has asked really good questions. That is a solid question of like what we should get back to him. So that's great that it gives them a good impression, but more importantly, it gives you a lot more insight. Like, yeah, that's cool that they get wowed by it if they do. But it is a very intriguing question for you too, because it's going to teach you a lot from that question, right? Which is, what is a poor choice for the position? Sometimes better than telling you what they want in a candidate, it's sometimes easier to understand what they don't want, so you know what to avoid. So that's kind of my point of asking that kind of question, because the last thing I want to do is assume things based on what they tell me they want and then be like doing things they don't want me to be doing, right? So it's sometimes easier for me to understand that part. The other one over here that I like to use is what prompted it. If they ask you questions, like they tell you the whole spiel, which is almost every interview, everything they want out of you, this is a good one to follow up with at the end, because you can kind of follow it up with, well, what would happen if we didn't do any of that? What would happen if you didn't hire anyone for this role? What would happen to the company? And that's really thought-provoking, because then they have to refer back to being like, well, we would lose our jobs, or like the company would go under, or they could even just say something like, not much, because like we're managing it right now and this isn't like a super big deal. And that stuff allows you to kind of make other assumptions, right? Like, okay, well then what would the pay be like? What is like negotiation going to be like after this? If they don't really need me, then I don't really have much leverage. If they really need me, then maybe I'm more willing to go in with a higher offer because I know they need me, right? It also could help you understand how you want to structure when you deliver things to them. So if I know that the company is literally going to go under if we don't do this right, well, then I want to make sure that our communication is going to stakeholders so that we look good as a team. And I also want to make sure that we're working on like high level things, right? To make sure those things are taken care of, to kind of push that stuff forward. So it can do a lot of different things, asking the right type of questions. The main point is to make sure you understand what the company's like before going and taking that job. But the other side is that you get this nice lasting impression of like, oh, they asked a really thought-provoking question at the end, and that's going to be their lasting impression of you, right? When they move on to the next one, that's going to be the last thing they remember. So hopefully you guys wrote these down. If not, I can send you over a resource where these are all listed anyways that I've written in the past.
I wrote it all down.
Perfect. Okay. I figured Vera might have something like that for us. Okay. So that was kind of it for tonight. We're right on time with the 45-minute timeline. What did we think of this? Is this valuable to you guys? Did you like doing this? I guess my first question.
I loved it. This is
Okay,
great.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Seeing some head nods.
Yeah,
Great.
very
thumbs up.
valuable.
Perfect. Okay. How do we like more of me almost lecturing with some high level insights on this presentation? Do you like that, or would you prefer it to be more just like worded out so you can read it and take notes a little bit better? What do you prefer there?
I
I
think
think
I
this worked
preferred.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then lastly, how about the topics that we have set up for the coming months? Do we like those ones that are set up? And if we like this format and you don't see the topic on there, is there a topic that you guys specifically want to dive into that we can schedule?
I'm interested if you could do one on like conflict or conflict resolution, like how you've managed like
That's great.
hostile stakeholders or constituents or whatever.
Yeah, that's
Um,
a really good one. I like that a lot.
Or one thing you could do is set up like a form on Google and then just ask us some questions like, yeah, like on a 0 to 10, how was it? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Or what do you want us to cover for next time? Or do you have any ideas?
Okay, cool. Yeah, let me send that out. And I think I'll probably send that out here in just a little bit, give some other people that weren't here live to watch it, and then maybe we'll get a little bit better of a response. That's great. Thanks, Eric.
My pleasure.
Any other topics that come to mind while we're talking about this before we end? I think the conflict one's great.
I think maybe team leading or leadership might be a
Oh,
good
yeah.
good
Okay.
aspect to talk about.
Team leading. Okay. Awesome. Leadership. Okay. I'll lead with those and try to schedule those out as soon as we can. Again, I always appreciate when you guys do join live. Makes it a lot easier to have a crowd to talk to. So thank you. And look forward to seeing you guys next week with Megan. We'll have another guest speaker coming up.
Are you gonna send those
Awesome.
resources for the tech interview?
Yes,
mentioned
I'll
that
put them
earlier.
in probably just like our announcements channel. Just let people
Okay.
know we had the event, and then
Yeah.
I'll put it all in there for you guys. So you
I'm
can
just
click
asking
on
because I have a tech interview tomorrow. So
Oh,
if I could see it
perfect.
tonight, then I'd be like, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll get that over to you like right after this then.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. Okay, thank you everybody so much for your time, and we'll talk again next week on Thursday.
Take care.
Okay,
All
we'll
right,
see ya.
take care.